morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for the first session of the second day of Homes Within Reach. We are just so excited to have all of you be with us for the 16th annual Homes Within Reach conference and our first ever virtual conference. So for those of you who may not know who I am Gail Schwartz with the Housing Alliance of Pennsylvania, the Associate Director of Housing and Strategic Initiatives. With that, let's go ahead and get today's workshop started. I'm just going to share. I don't have screen sharing capabilities. Could somebody enable me, please, to share the screen?
Sure, give me 1 second. You should be able to now, Gail.
Fantastic. Thank you. All right, so with that, I want to thank you for joining today's conversation around designing a rental assistance program. This is very much a hot topic in the world right now in many spaces, as you know, we are all working to challenge or address the challenges of the COVID-19 pandemic and its impact on housing, on particularly the most vulnerable tenants, and also all of those folks who have found themselves experiencing a degree of economic crisis that they have never experienced before, leading to long and sustained past due rent notices, past due eviction notices, past due utilities, and everything of that nature. So with us, I just want to introduce our panel. As I said, I'm Gail Schwartz with the Housing Alliance. We also have Justin Eby, the Deputy Executive Director with the Lancaster County Redevelopment Authority. Justin is responsible for the planning, development, and evaluation of several countywide community development and rehabilitation programs that address affordable housing, infrastructure, and borough revitalization. We also have Chuck Keenan with the Allegheny County Department of Human Services. Chuck is responsible for coordinating all aspects of Allegheny County's housing initiatives within DHS and working with organizations outside the agency in order to fully utilize affordable housing resources for DHS consumers. And then last, we have Sarah Jacoby, Vice President, Community Impact with Pocono Mountains United Way. Sarah leads integration and alignment of strategy, function, and process for the organization. In addition to oversight and administration of government-funded grants and reimbursement programs, she also coordinates United Way's local and regional partnerships, direct services in United Way-led initiatives, and strategic investment. So I am very excited about this conversation and about the panel that we have with us today, as they all have done really great experience and work in the community with housing well before this pandemic, and of course have done some really great work in working with the previous statewide rental assistance program, and really have some great insights as, you know, we all figure out together what the next rental assistance program can do for Pennsylvania. So just to go over our agenda real quickly, what I would like to do is just give a high-level overview of the new emergency rental assistance program that was a part of the most recent COVID-19 relief package. It's a high-level overview of what's written in the legislation, and then I'm also going to go over recommendations that were put out by the Housing Alliance. This will then be followed by a conversation with our 3 panelists. So just to give some context, the Housing Alliance recommendations are really informed by recent analysis put out by the National Low Income Housing Coalition, along with many partners, of rental assistance programs across the nation, and really the best information that we have today. And as all things with the COVID-19 pandemic, sometimes it changes by the week, sometimes it changes by the day, and sometimes it changes by the hour. So we are really just working with the best information we have at the moment. These recommendations are evolving and subject to change, and we are still anticipating formal guidance from the Treasury Department as well. Our intent with today's conversation really is to kind of brainstorm and share ideas among peers, the things to be considered when designing these programs and getting them to stand up in communities and be widely accessible to tenants and landlords. Neither the Housing Alliance recommendations nor anything discussed here today should be considered any form of legally binding guidance. So now that we've gone through that, again, this is a rental assistance program that came from the most recent COVID relief bill that was signed into law December 27th. It was last night at midnight that the state and localities that had over 200,000 people had to put a submission required for a receipt so that they could get their allocation of money. It was announced yesterday that for Pennsylvania, we are going to be receiving, it's actually not estimated, I'll correct that when we send this out, but $847 million, 688,778.80 cents in rental assistance. And 90% of these funds are expected to go to direct assistance for people in need, with 10% of the funds to be used for administration fees and other housing stability services. It is pretty explicit in the legislation that programs really cannot make a commitment to make rent payments without having provided some assistance to the arrears. It really is expected that there be up to 12 months of assistance and a potential for an additional 3 months of assistance if it really is necessary to ensure the stability of the household. For households that are getting that forward-going rent payments, there is going to be 3 months recertification that has to happen. This assistance cannot be duplicative of other assistance that they're getting. So you cannot use 2 forms of federal funds to pay for, January rent, but you can use one to pay for January rent or one to pay for February rent, that sort of thing. Like, you can actually align them pretty closely, but you just cannot double dip. And then there's no cap on assistance per household. There are some pretty specific income targets and prioritization written into the legislation. It is meant to serve households at 80% area median income. They are also looking for people to have one of the following qualifying experiences. So, being able to qualify for unemployment or demonstrate unemployment, being able to present past due utility bills, rent notice, eviction notice, evidence that they're living in unsafe conditions, things of that nature. And then also, they must prioritize households below 50% area median income, or those who are completely without a job or have been unemployed for more than 3 months. Application and verifications within the legislation, it really does seem to have very, very low regulation on this piece, which I think is really good. Landlords or tenants can apply for assistance. They really are looking for a single application. The only expectation is that if it's the landlord that is initiating assistance, that they do want the tenant involved in signing off on what the landlord is requesting. There are no additional requirements put on landlords. States are encouraged to have a simplified verification process to minimize administrative burdens on applicants. And there is an option to provide payments directly to tenants in the event that the landlord refuses to participate in the program. Again, there are admin and case management fees or case management and housing stabilization allowances up to 10%. And then there is a deadline that, you really want to be done processing all of your applications and by September 30th, so that they know all of the funding is really sort of allocated and promised out, and then they really want to see all of those funds spent by December 30th. And it's important to know that in the event that there are unspent funds, it will be returned to the federal government. It cannot go to anywhere else in Pennsylvania. So in looking at that, we have the Housing Alliance recommendations. So again, with eligible uses, we really think overall it's best not to go far and above what has already been put into the legislation. Best practice really tells us that the easiest process and the simplest process is usually the most effective, especially with so much resource out there that we have to so much money to deliver so quickly. It really is not a marathon. It's a 100-meter dash, and there's a lot to expend in a very, very short amount of time. So simplicity is absolutely key. It is going to be key for the human beings that are going to be administering the programs. It's going to be absolutely key for the people experiencing the crisis and needing the assistance, both the tenants and the landlords. So again, 12 months of assistance with that 3 months recertification. We really want to focus on paying arrears, especially in the wake of last year's rent relief program, in that it didn't quite fulfill its promise. So we know that there's a whole lot of people out there who attempted to demonstrate their need, but it was too cumbersome. So we know that the need is out there, but we know that it didn't get met. So we really want to see those arrears squared away. No cap on assistance. Again, we want to make sure that programs are accepting, current written as well as oral leases. I think it's, good to know that in Pennsylvania, it is legal for somebody to have an oral lease up to 3 years. So we want to make sure that we're not holding a standard that is above what's current in the law. For income targets and prioritization, again, really targeting those households that are below the 50% area median income. We also looked very closely at what folks were doing in Washington State and thinking about equity, racial equity, and looking at what are some other prioritization criteria that will help you connect and serve the most vulnerable households. And that's looking at folks who are severely cost burdened, looking at folks who have experienced homelessness within the past 5 years, have experienced an eviction within the past 7 years, have experienced disruption due to discrimination, and also are at risk of severe illness or are currently living with a disability. Of course, we do want to see some evidence of need for the arrears, and then making sure that folks are eligible for assistance, even if there's simply a partial payment made for 1 month. We just don't want to make it too terribly cumbersome. And then, of course, application and verifications. This legislation is, pretty forgiving in that it really does allow for self-certification. It doesn't explicitly state that, and there is a movement for guidance to explicitly state that, but nothing in the legislation currently precludes communities from doing self-certification. So we are encouraging folks to go that route. Again, this is all about expediting the applications. I don't think that this program should be responsible for paying late fees or penalties for the months covered by assistance. I think we, really need to focus on the rent paid and what's needed. And then, of course, really keeping with a single simplified application process. So with that, like I said, this was a very, very quick high-level overview. We do have a written document that sort of summarizes everything that's in today's presentation, as well as we can share this PowerPoint slide with all of the folks participating this morning. But really, what we wanted the meat of this workshop to be is this brainstorming and sharing among practitioners who helped administer and played a role in last year's program, and what are we thinking going forward with this program. So with that, I am going to call on Chuck from Allegheny County. And I just wanted to ask, what were some of the hard lessons learned that you are taking from last year's rental assistance program, and how do you plan on applying it to program design going forward?
Sure. Well, we definitely learned a lot of lessons with the first go round of CARES rent relief money. I think the first one is that it's not a typical kind of social service program. It's really a production assembly line approach that you need to take to serve the most clients in the quickest manner possible. So I know those of us that are in social service don't like to treat people without trying to serve the whole person, but we really need to take a look at real fine points in the program so that you're really focusing on getting what you need from the client as quickly as possible, determining whether they're eligible or not, and then if they are eligible, getting them paid. We had a fairly long lag from the initial start of the program before we started to make what we call meaningful contact with people. Basically because we were trying to get the first group of people through the process, and we had let the other people that applied a week or two later kind of pile up on us, and it just got to be overwhelming. So I think it's important to kind of treat this almost like an assembly line, and to throw resources where your production is slow. So we looked at this thing called theory of constraints, but basically, like if you're building a car and everything's going fine on the assembly line, but the person who's putting the engine in the car is going slow, that's really as fast as your assembly line can go. You can only produce as many cars as your slowest piece of the puzzle or piece of the assembly line. So if that person is slow, you need to throw more resources at that particular place. So for us, that slow choke point was at the processing piece of the application. So it's just getting all the necessary documentation in from clients, which was really a difficult piece. A lot of people would submit documentation and they think that what they submitted was good. So they might submit an unemployment letter, for instance, but the unemployment letter was prior to March 1st. So they weren't eligible, but we weren't communicating with them enough to let them understand that that wasn't going to meet the eligibility criteria. So really just a way to look at this as in a different way as a typical social service program, and really as a high volume production type of a model, and just trying to get as many people through as quickly as possible so that you can get on to the next person. I mean, we really produced a lot at the end of the program, but it took us a while to get there. So that would be, I think, the main thing. And then another one is just, we had an online application, but we also allowed paper applications to come in. Our online application was a one and done application. So you had one opportunity to submit documents through that application. And if you didn't, then we started to communicate with you through either email or phone calls. So I think when we do the second round, we're going to actually have people sign in, create an account, and then we can communicate with them through that online portal. So if they're missing a lease, for instance, we can send something back to their account. We'll say, hey, your lease isn't here. Can you please send that along? Rather than having to communicate with them either by the phone or by email. So they can always check their status. They can see what's missing and what's complete and kind of where they are in the flow. So we had a lot of calls just that were basically status calls, and it took a lot of time just to get through those. And it took away from the production piece. So I think those are the two biggest lessons that we learned in Allegheny County.
Sarah and Justin, is there anything you would like to add to that?
Sure. So I think, again, kind of piggybacking on Chuck here, definitely the communication and the paper applications and just how you set up your intake is very, very important to get the funding out quickly. We also in Lancaster County had 400 or 500 applications where we had to keep going back multiple times each week. You missed this critical step in your application, we can't move forward with eligibility. And then that's just started a bottleneck of applications, but then a bottleneck of communication. Our phone lines, our emails, we can't make you, we can't help with eligibility if we're spending all of our time in communication. So that's very key moving forward. I also, let the local administrators, let the local government figure this out for ourselves. The biggest issue for us was we knew what the problems were in the second week of the program. We had to convince the legislation to make changes. And we all know what's going on in the country, there's other areas that they're focusing on. And so as practitioners, we couldn't actually get the resources out appropriately, which then comes back on us from the local community. Well, we know we qualify. Why aren't you providing this assistance? Why are you making us go through so many hoops? I think those are very key lessons for this program and any program moving forward, is allow us the flexibility, allow us to be responsible for making the decisions on this. And I'll go back to the paper applications. We are also going to be setting up an online version where you log in and you can continue. Whether you can't complete your application, you save it and you come back the next day and finish it. Additionally, we will put those required fields in so that you're not going to the next step without all the information we need to qualify you. I mean, with a paper application, you can't say, nope, you didn't do that right. We accept it, and then we have to go back and have that conversation with them. I think streamlining, I love the idea of being able to have them self-certify all the information they're providing, have these questions available to them that we can then filter the applications ourselves and target the certain audiences. And there's some other things that I'll talk about as we move on, but I think just on this specific question, those are kind of the key points I have.
Yeah, I would very much echo what both Chuck and Justin shared. I think that assembly line metaphor is a great one. For us, it was a significant bottleneck that we had to keep going back and touching those applications repeatedly, trying to get in touch with people. They didn't answer the phone. They didn't respond to emails. They didn't respond to text messages. They may have gotten back to us in some cases 30 or 60 days after their application. Don't really know what was taking people so long, but it was a constant game of trying to match things up, whether it was a landlord who submitted things separately from a tenant, and then the tenant application was incomplete, and so they would send in documentation in some cases weeks later. So trying to just put in place those systems to minimize the amount of time that staff has to keep going back and revisiting things, I think is critical. Another piece that was important for us is to note that in some cases, this program was really difficult for the landlords to comply with. Some of them didn't understand the deadlines and things like that. And some of them were just overwhelmed with their own lives or their own businesses. And especially towards the end, that created a very significant problem where we had people who could have been approved, but their landlord did not submit paperwork to us in time. And so therefore we had to deny the client assistance, which was really, really unfortunate. We did as much outreach as we possibly could, one-on-one, making phone calls, sending emails to landlords, trying to educate them on why this was so critical. And in the end, some of them just either didn't understand it, weren't able to comply, or didn't see it as a priority, or whatever the case was. One other thing that I might mention is that we needed nearly full-time phone support just to handle the calls incoming from people who were either calling with questions, calling to check on the status of their application, or who were actually returning a call in order to discuss their application, which we were ready to process. Fortunately, we had that in place in our office. We have a information referral line that's staffed by 2 people full-time during normal business hours. So that really did help. But that was something that we hadn't quite anticipated, was the volume of communication that would be coming in outside of the application process.
Thank you. That's all really great insights, and really taking those insights, what are the elements that you see in this new program that you think will be most helpful in exhausting the funding? I mean, I think you all have already touched on kind of like this self-certification type piece, but what are other pieces of it that are really standing out to you as being a positive? Justin, if we can start with you.
Sure. And I think for me personally, it's not necessarily how quickly or how successful we are exhausting the funds we get, but are we able to help that tenant fulfill all their obligations during this pandemic to the landlord? So that's, I think the biggest thing, having that 6-month window, we already have individuals and tenants and families that owe 6 months since the rent relief program. So having such a much larger window of financial assistance, having 12 months, potentially even additional 3, if we feel like that's the best move for that individual or family stability in their housing. I think, again, making them whole, making landlords whole, eliminates a lot of the landlord-tenant issues. Well, you said you still owe the fees, or you said, I think with the rent relief program, we were kind of handcuffed at just providing the base rent. A lot of the leases include sewer fees, pet fees. They have built in the penalty fees, and so then, they were requesting what they thought was base rent, but it actually included so much more. And by just having the flexibility to just pay all rental related fees is going to help the communication, the confusion by both the tenants and the landlords. And it will also help us where we don't have to be requesting ledgers from the landlords, asking them to back out all these other fees and other issues. So actually, I know and sorry, Gail, it's a Housing Alliance recommendation. I don't think in our county that we are going to add any restrictions to the landlords that they can't collect their back fees. I think that was a big sticking point for our landlords in Lancaster County, that they just want whole. They don't want to back out certain fees. So I think we just get their obligations satisfied and get them, and have them remain housed. So sorry.
I will clarify, and maybe we need to clarify this language, like pet fees or sewer fees, things that are already established within the lease, I think is, that's part of rent and that's part of housing costs. I think we were really like cumbersome late fees and penalties as a result of being behind on rent because of COVID, above and beyond what the person already agreed to in the lease. And so, but I do think, again, for us, we need to be a little bit more explicit and clarify that recommendation. So thank you for bringing up those points. Chuck, Sarah, is there anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I'm really happy to see the lifting of those caps. I hope that with Monroe County, where I am, is not going to be eligible for that direct federal funding. So we are going to be waiting on the state program to come out with this to push funding down to our community. But that $750 cap that was in place with the rent relief program was excessively low. Our average rent in Monroe County is closer to $1,500. So it was really difficult ask for landlords to just write off, you know, in some cases half or more of the rent that they need to make their business work. So I'm happy to see that cap being lifted. I hope that if there is anything in place, it's maybe more in line with like 130% of fair market rent. I think that would just about cover people for the most part. I do agree definitely with paying the back rent to landlords. We had difficulty with a number of landlords. Most of the landlords in our community are small, kind of like mom and pop type operations. They are not necessarily run by bigger organizations. And so in some cases, the landlords did not have adequate record keeping to be able to detail to us the amounts that were owed by month for a given tenant, particularly if the tenant was attempting to make partial payments. They were kind of just taking that off the lump sum that was owed, and the rent relief program required us to break out by month how much was being paid or was owed to the landlord. So just administrative things like that were difficult for landlords to comply with.
And just, I think we were really pleased with the legislation that came out. It seemed that people who wrote it were listening to the advocates over the last year or so, or I guess 9 months. And we really like the self-certification part. We like the fact that there's not a whole lot of burden, that there is a kind of a targeting to lower income folks at 80% or below of AMI. So things that we would normally want out of a piece of legislation seemed like it was good. I don't know where the guidance and the regulations are going to go, but at least in terms of the legislation, I think we were really pleased that there aren't caps on the amount that you can spend, that there is an option for self-certification for some things. So it seemed like people were listening to the advocates, and I don't know who all was involved in helping with the legislation being written, but at least in terms of how it relates to the first program that was launched, it's pretty good. I mean, we are an entitlement community for both the first piece and the second piece. In fact, we at the city of Pittsburgh can actually get the direct allocation in this go round too, which they couldn't the first time. So we, found that not having any additional burden from the first group. So we didn't even work much with the state program in the first CARES Act. We use mostly local money because the first program was pretty difficult to do. The 750 was low. We had to actually double that to even serve landlords. And so it seems like it mimicked what we were trying to do locally in the second round of legislation. So we'll see where it goes. At least the start was pretty good.
Good. And then I think, again, sort of like you're working under this deadline, and granted there's a little bit more space here, but I think by the time funds get released and programs are standing up, it will be a lot of work in a short amount of time. And I think looking at these three communities, both Lancaster and Allegheny, will be able to get a direct allotment of money from the federal government. Sarah already mentioned that they will have to get funding through the state. But of the three programs, I think, Poconos Mountains or Monroe County did very, very well in spending down what they were allotted in the rent relief program. So I just was wondering sort of what are those strategies that you can share in the outreach and how you were able to expend, and then also, of course, expand that question to the other two communities as well.
Yeah, I think the most significant thing for us, and I know that this new legislation calls for it, the deadline for applications being September 30th and the deadline to expend funds December 30th gives us 90 days of runway to clear through a backlog. That's really critical. When they extended the deadline to apply for the rent relief program to November 4th, when the deadline to expend funds remained unchanged from November 30th, that did not leave us enough runway to clear backlog. We made it our mission to make sure that every application was reviewed before the deadline, and we met that goal. But there were things that were out of our hands in terms of tenants or landlords not getting documentation back to us in time. I mean, especially because that deadline bumped up against the Thanksgiving holiday where many people were just either kind of out of communication. I mean, our staff was working right up until the last minute, literally, but it was difficult to get in touch with landlords in particular over that long weekend right before the program closed down and we couldn't expend funds. So I'm really happy to see something more like a 90-day period in which we have time to clear that backlog. We had at one point a 6 to 7 week backlog of applications, and that was despite putting 4 full-time staffers solely dedicated to the program, plus additional staff that was in supporting roles. But as far as, additional strategies, my goal here was to speak out for some of the smaller communities across the state, recognizing Lancaster and Allegheny or Pittsburgh are a little bit different from the majority of communities across the state where there may be limited administrators who have the capacity to even staff up for something like this. We hired a number of people. We were fortunate to have some ties and some relationships with people who were available from other jobs that they had been working at. And so we were able to pull them into the program, but I recognize that that's not always going to be an option. So one of the sort of like out of the box ideas that I had was if we could have a shared system and kind of spread the workload a little bit using one centralized database where people would apply and applications would otherwise be stored if they came in, through paper or other means. It might be possible to actually spread the work among a couple of different nonprofits in the community. I've cautioned it's not a money saving effort or anything like that. It's really just a matter of this is a massive amount of money to spend. I think most people are aware that we spent less than a third of the rent relief program assistance that we had available across the state. And so I'm proud in Monroe County, we spent over $1 million of our $1.1 million allocation. So we did come very close to expending what was expected, but it was a real challenge for us to handle just as one organization, particularly with some of the constraints of the pandemic and people needing to work from home and things like that. I think Chuck mentioned earlier about having an electronic application. I know Justin's indicated they're moving in that direction. We really need to explore something like that as well. We tried to be very flexible with people, understanding that they may not have access to technology or even just the skills to deal with it. So we were accepting everything from, printed and handwritten applications. We were accepting them mailed to our office, accepting, pictures of documents that were mailed to us, emailed to us, just as long as it was legible and complete, we would accept it. And so we were just trying to be very flexible with people. And I think that helped because we were actually surprised with the number of older folks that were applying. We had people up to about 75 who actually were still working, who lost employment due to COVID and were therefore eligible for the program. And we had actually quite a few people who were not able to access their electronic payroll records. They just didn't have the technology skills to navigate into those websites and things like that. So that was something additional that we needed to be able to somehow provide support for. So I'm hoping with the self-certification, some of those issues are mitigated, but I think those are some of the things that we'll be looking at.
Yeah, I think for us, the biggest thing to make sure you spend the money is to start as early as possible on each application that comes in, and don't let yourself get a backlog and kind of overrun once the program really starts to get a lot of applicants in it. So if people don't have what you need at the initial stage, just tell them what you need and move on. Don't let that person be someone that you call every day for 2 weeks and then finally close them out, because you're going to neglect the 50 people that are behind them who maybe need one document or 2 documents that are going to be more responsive. So just kind of do like this production system where people can get plug and played right in. So anybody can open up any file and see what the status of it is and what's missing, rather than have like an assigned caseworker to each person who then just works on their 100 cases that are assigned to them. And meanwhile, those 100, there are 1,000 people that have applied while they're working on that 100, because you'll just never catch up with the waterfall. So I think that's the biggest thing that I would say. If you're interested in spending the money, just kind of don't treat people like this whole person. Treat them as like, okay, this is an application and this is what we need from that application. Make a quick call to them or an email to them, say the ball's in your court, this is what we need from you, please submit it, and then move on to the next one and keep doing that same thing. So
I would agree with both of the other panel members here as far as again, what Sarah said. You never want to have a deadline right next to another deadline. And we also had an issue of trying to get, it was almost a mad rush of folks, landlords and tenants, just sending us everything they could to qualify in the month of November. Honestly, 3/4 of the funds we spent for rent relief were spent in November, because there was finally a push of these funds are going away. And if you don't get us information, you're not going to get the assistance. And it just put a huge burden on us. I know I was working 60 hours a week, just trying to keep all of us, in a good place to get this done. And additionally, I want to echo, we are looking at online application. We are going to do that. It ties a little bit into our housing authority software. It will allow for more of that coordinated intake, that the bottleneck will be at the intake. It won't hopefully not be in the eligibility requirements and the payments. We're also approaching kind of a assembly line process where other nonprofit housing agencies will be taking certain tasks. Maybe they will be taking a call center and a status update away from our organization, so we can focus on the overall product. Perhaps we'll have a local nonprofit housing organization that takes on the priorities of 50% AMI and less, and another one takes on maybe looking at applications that need assistance moving forward that maybe don't have rental arrears. So that way, the various different populations that we're serving, and we can kind of focus and try to get the funding out to those who need it the most first. And I think with the online application, again, it's gonna cost us a little bit, but it's worth the direct administrative costs where you're taking 4 or 5 staff members to be able to focus on other items instead of, you took a photo of your pay stub. I just can't see what that says. So having the self-certification, a lot of these people, they've moved on to another job, so they can't get the information about their employment, or perhaps they're working remotely, or they just don't have access to scanners or copiers or other things to be able to copy the documentation we need and send it to us. So I think, again, anything that we can self-certify, income, unemployment information, their rent, is just going to be very, very helpful so that we can get this moving quickly. We can get the funds out. That's the whole point of a relief, is get the funds out quickly. So
yeah, and I just kind of finish up a thought too is, we always worry about the people who are least likely to apply or who are going to be least likely to be successful when they do apply. But I don't think you want to set your system up for those folks. You want to try to set it up for the people that do have some technical ability, some ability to submit documents and things like that, but realize that you have people in your community that can't do that, and try to help them be able to fit into your system. So we're looking at doing some drop-in centers and some hubs, even though it is, we're in the middle of a pandemic and there's COVID out there. We do know there's a huge tech divide, especially among the people that we're trying to serve, but we just can't allow like paper applications to come in and all these other forms of applications and just have a one and done system, because it overwhelmed us, and it wasn't fair to the people that we're trying to apply. We are trying to, again, fit in on this theory of constraints area where we can support people who need it, but we don't want to design a system specifically for them. So I don't know if I'm saying that right, but basically we know that there are people that aren't going to be able to navigate what the system that we're going to try to do online, but we still want to make those folks use that system and just help them to be able to do that. So if it's just have a case manager who can sit with them and help them fill out the application, even if they call into us and we create an email account for them, like just give them a Gmail account and we fill out the application over the phone and we don't have any documentation, at least we've got an application created and we have some contact information and we can assign in somebody to go work with them to get the documents that they need. So that's basically just saying, you have to be kind of understanding of the administrative burden that this program places on you and try to reduce that burden, but also realize that you have people that you're going to have to help.
Yeah, and I would echo that we are also looking at opening, we have an eviction prevention network. So utilizing what we call hubs throughout Lancaster County that people can go to those hubs and get computer access and can work with a case manager to fill it out. Again, just definitely wanted to point that out to Chuck that, I think we're all thinking that there will be some kind of divide, and how do we make it fair for everyone?
I think that's some really interesting points. And I think we have seen models of community navigation to help people access these resources that kind of serve to walk alongside tenants or people in need, especially if there's a technical divide, to help connect them to the resources where there may be additional barriers preventing them besides just experiencing the need. And there will be a workshop on that later. I'm not quite sure when it happens, but it is Navigating COVID-19 is the name of the workshop for folks who want to check that out. That will talk about sort of models for community navigators. I think we've gotten a couple questions again around sort of this online application piece, and you guys have done a good deep dive into it, but do you know of any software or recommendations or how you're going about just standing up that piece? Because that is a big undertaking again in a short amount of time.
We're doing ours ourselves. We have an IT department. It's going to take us more than a month to do it. We're in requirements determination now and trying to build screens and things. But I heard Salesforce has a product that might work for people off the shelf. And there was another one too,
I think we had talked about FormStack.
Yeah, FormStack, that's what it was, right. So I think those two have had some work in this space and might be able to customize something for you, or you can use for something off the shelf. Yeah.
Okay, and then going into some of, I guess, verification piece in regards to double dipping. If data is really not being shared between programs, what are some strategies that you guys have tried or are looking to put in to make sure that folks are getting the needed help but are not exploiting the program?
I was actually thinking about that last night. one of the topics I haven't tackled yet as we design this, and actually before I mentioned that, for our software, our housing authority software is with MRI, which is out of Cleveland, and so we are actually using one of their products, and hopefully have our online application up probably second week of February, if all goes well. And that also converts the application into 20-25 different languages as well. So that's another barrier that we wanted to try to meet. For the quote unquote double dipping, obviously we'll have a question on our application as far as have you received other funding. For us, it's the same agencies that worked on the rent relief program. And currently, actually, in Lancaster County, we're using our CDBG CV money for a kind of that gap between the one program and this program to be able to assist people. So We do have we have a database that we use for the homeless network that we've been entering a lot of this information in. So we'll be able to see, it's called Empower Lancaster, what other sources they've had in the past, but also because we had contracts and we had specific legal language in our contracts with our providers, we will be able to provide access to that data so that they can just double check whether or not that tenant has received assistance for the same months.
Yeah, in Allegheny County, we have a data warehouse that is pretty robust, and we can cross match people against our HMIS system, even the housing authorities and some other service providers. Our Urban Redevelopment Authority for the city of Pittsburgh, for example, runs a rental relief program. They use HMIS, so we can cross match people against our HMIS and other systems that are in our data warehouse to see if they're receiving assistance at the same time. Landlords oftentimes too let you know that they've been paid out of another program. So sometimes landlords are honest and will let you know, hey, I already received rent for this client for this month. I don't need it again. So I think that's kind of a second backstop for us. But yeah, just asking the client to certify that they haven't received assistance is kind of step one. Then we can cross match against our data warehouse. And then if those two fail, hopefully our landlord is honest and tells us that they've already been paid for that month.
Excellent. Excellent. So there was a question around oral leases. In your programs, did you all accept oral leases, and how did you go about sort of verifying, or what did that process look like when working with a tenant who has an oral lease?
So I believe the rent relief program required that if there was an oral lease in place, that there had to be a letter signed by both landlord and tenant that stated the name of the tenant, the address, and the monthly rent amount. So we just needed to get that verification from people. It was something that we watched out for. We saw a number of people with oral leases, including people who were renting from family members. So it was just something that we kind of keyed into and paid attention to. But really, at the end of the day, this was something that they were attesting to, and we had to just leave it at that, because there was no way we could ask people for, you know, records of past payments like prior to the pandemic to substantiate that they had been paying that amount in rent, you know, for some period of time prior. It was just, we had to just have people sign to it and leave it at that.
And then so I think one of the questions that we have is just kind of a general, who's going to be setting the regulations and guidelines for distribution of the rent relief funds. Of course, there's going to be some guidance from the Treasury. And then there will be, I think, additional opportunity for local programs, administering agencies to create some program regulations. So Chuck and Justin, it's going to be your all's agencies and your communities that are going to be kind of the deciders of local rules within allowance from the Treasury, correct?
Yes, and I don't anticipate we're going to layer any more regulations on top of what the Treasury is going to say. I'm not positive on that. We do have two players in our area. Like I said, the city is going to get a direct allocation, and the county is going to. So they may have some minor discrepancies between the two, but hopefully we both just adopt the Treasury and use the least restrictive. I don't know what the state's going to do. Sarah's going to have to, see if the legislature gets involved, if who even is going to be the recipient, I guess, at the state, if it's going to be PHFA again, or I've even heard DHS might get the allocation this time. So, there'll be people trying to insert themselves into that process, I guess.
Yeah, I would agree. We would just adopt most likely the Treasury guidelines. We started the discussion already with our stakeholders, and I think everyone's goal is just to set up a streamlined process that makes sense to the client. And from there, we just have our probably a monthly, weekly check-ins. And so right now it's just kind of building the what do we do as stakeholders for the county. But yeah, definitely would not going to add layers and layers to this.
Yeah, and I can say the Housing Alliance is, has been meeting with folks in the legislature as well as the governor's office to talk about, what this new program will look like. It will be a completely new program. There will need to be a legislative action. The details of that is still a little bit unclear, but we're continuing to research that question, whether it's something that could be easily attached to a fiscal code, or does it need to be a standalone bill or something like that. But again, our recommendations to the state, of course, is again not to put anything onerous above and beyond what the Treasury has created.
Yeah, and I think especially with the amount of money that's coming into the state, usually when you put additional restrictions on it, it's because you need to target the money because the resources are limited and you want to make sure you reach the right person. I don't know that the state's going to have that problem this time. I hope there's enough resources to serve everybody that applies, so there's no need to prioritize or add additional layers. Now, if it looks like you're going to spend everything, then maybe you want to revisit that, or spend everything and leave people who aren't going to get served. Then you might need to do some additional layering or prioritization.
I would just add something I thought of just kind of looking at the rent relief program in some of the smaller rural counties is, I think, I forget who it was here, maybe it was Chuck or someone had mentioned that some of the larger counties, we have these agencies, organizations, and staff to be able to create this framework and tackle a program like this. Perhaps a larger, such as PHFA or someone, is able to actually administer those funds on behalf of some of those smaller rural counties where they don't have to scramble to try to find the staff or someone knowledgeable in that program.
It's a really good point. So in thinking about, Sarah, you are one of the community organizations. Chuck and Justin, you are going to be managing entities. So what do you think those partnerships really need to look at between the local community organizations and the managing entities, with this sort of holistic all hands on deck? How do those community partners really help reduce the bottleneck and help that 10% allocation go a lot further?
It's just adding additional professional, knowledgeable individuals to help address these, address this program. I think it's just we've learned that we've created many great partnerships through various other programs with the rent relief program, and now with this program, it's just having that collaborative effort, and you just want to make sure that one organization is taking the lead in all of this, and that organization is also hearing from the other ones that are helping you out and participating. That way there are no longer term issues or questions about everyone's roles and responsibilities.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing for us is make sure they're adequately staffed when the program starts and they don't get behind. Don't be stingy on the front end of the staff at that agency that's going to administer the program. Make sure that they have enough people to process quickly, to reach people quickly when the flood gates open and the program starts. And then if you need to back down a little bit from there because it's slowed down and people are getting processed, do it that way. I think we did it the opposite way. We started pretty well staffed, but we got so behind that we had to add people at the end. And then as Justin and Sarah were saying, it was just like in November was just a rush of payments and everything. So if you kind of treat the program that way from the beginning, that you're going to have a big rush at the beginning and maybe you can taper it down. I just think being mindful of staff needs that you're going to have at the agency.
So welcome the flood is your best advice.
be prepared for an onslaught of applications when the program
All
starts.
right. Well, we have about a minute left. I want to thank our panel. I want to thank all of the folks who attended and put up some really, really great questions. This conversation is going to be continued in a networking session that is happening Thursday afternoon. It's the final piece of our conference. And so we really hope that you come and that we can continue this conversation, this brainstorming ideas, this thinking through of what will this really, really look like. And, you know, again, thank you all for being a part of this session and for the great insights and of course the amazing work that you have been doing as everybody has been committing so much of themselves to helping the most vulnerable Pennsylvanians weather this long-standing crisis. So thank you to our attendees, and everybody enjoy the rest of the conference.